The call came in the middle of the night. The voice on the other end of the line was full of hesitation, but it didn't take long to release the words that went through me like a sharp blade. She was in a restaurant, with him. The blood left my face, my breathing became short. Every beat of my heart felt like a war drum in my chest. It couldn't be. Not her. Not now. I asked twice, 3 times, wanting to hear another answer, something that would say it was a mistake, that this was nothing more than a cruel joke. But the answer came cold, raw, real. My wife was with another man. My body moved before my mind could decide. I took the keys and left the house without even closing the door properly. The drive to the restaurant was a blur of headlights and jumbled thoughts. What was I going to do when I got there? How would I react to seeing them together? I tried to prepare myself, but the truth is that there is no preparation for betrayal. It's a low, unexpected blow that hits hard and rips something out of you, something that will never be the same again. The parking lot was full, but my eyes didn't see anything other than the restaurant's illuminated windows. Inside, among muffled laughter, distracted couples and waiters going about their routines, she was there. Smiling. Talking. Touching another man's arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. He held his wine glass as he spoke, relaxed, confident, completely comfortable in a role that should never have been his. I lacked air. The betrayal was not just the fact that they were together, but the way they were together. It was the look, it was the lightness, it was the guiltless laughter. As if I had never existed. As if years with her had become irrelevant. I entered. My steps were heavy, determined. The ground felt firmer than ever, because now I knew. There were no more doubts. I went to the table, felt the eyes fall on me, and when she finally saw me, her smile died instantly. Shock ran across his face, a split second before fear set in. The lover froze with the glass halfway to his lips. Neither of them had time to react before my voice cut the air, deep, full of something that wasn't just anger, it was the certainty that it all ended there. It's over. You're free. I want a divorce. Silence swallowed the restaurant. Some heads turned, others tried to pretend they weren't listening. The lover looked away, uncomfortable. She opened her mouth to say something, maybe an excuse, maybe a lie. I didn't let it. What else was there to say? Years of marriage, of promises, of trust, and everything was reduced to that moment, that dinner, that touch that was no longer mine. But I didn't go there just to say goodbye. I went there to destroy any illusion she still had that she would get away with it. I hope it was worth it, I continued, now lower, more cutting. Because as of today, you've lost everything. She blinked, confused. The lover frowned. They still didn't understand. Do you think you can do this to me and get away with it? I leaned over the table slightly, taking in every detail of the panic that was beginning to appear in her eyes. You never bothered to know whose name our joint accounts were in, the house you live in, the car you drive. Well, guess what? She turned pale. I took your name off everything. You have nothing left. No house, no car, no money. And now, no husband. The impact was immediate. She put her hand to her mouth, her lover shifted in his chair. Real panic, the one that is not just the shame of being caught but the fear of losing everything, began to show in his expression. The power she thought she had, the confidence that she would get out of this as easily as she came in, began to crumble right there, in front of everyone. I expected tears, I expected apologies, I expected anything that was even a trace of true regret. But what I saw was despair. Not for our marriage, not for what we had built together, but for what she had just lost. For the comfortable life that fell apart with just a few words. I didn't feel sorry. I took a step back, took a deep breath, savoring the scene I knew I would never forget. I turned my back and walked away, feeling the gazes weighing down on me. I wasn't the betrayed one who would wallow in self-pity. I was the man who left with his head held high, leaving behind the dead weight of a marriage that had already died even before that night. But what I didn't know was that this was just the beginning. The real game was yet to begin. She would try to reverse me. I would try to bend myself. And, above all, I would try to rise from the ashes I left behind. What she didn't know was that I was no longer the same man who once believed in her. What comes after a betrayal is not just pain. It's a battlefield where the survivors are those who know exactly how to play. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support and never romanticize betrayal. All the stories you hear are fictional, but they carry an undeniable truth. Betrayal destroys homes, breaks hearts, and changes lives forever. Our goal is to show the real consequences of these choices, without filters and without illusions. Now, get ready. You're about to hear a story shocking, intense, and full of twists and turns. Stay alert, because the worst thing about cheating is not just being discovered, but dealing with what comes after. From their first meeting, Ethan and Sophie seemed to be made for each other. He, a man with a steady gaze and a striking presence, someone who learned from an early age that success was achieved with effort and dedication. She, a captivating woman, with an easy laugh and engaging charisma, who always knew how to fill an environment with just her presence. The years with her had been intense, full of unforgettable moments that built not just a relationship, but a life in common, full of promises and shared plans. Ethan was always proud to have a woman like Sophie by his side, someone he believed he knew deeply, someone he trusted without hesitation. He would never have imagined that one day that trust would be put to the test in a way he could not even conceive of. The house they shared was a reflection of the history they had built. Each room had a memory, each piece of furniture seemed to carry a piece of the years they lived together. The sofa where they watched movies on the weekends, the kitchen chairs where they drank coffee every morning and discussed their plans for the future, the balcony where, on so many nights, they talked about the dreams they still had. Everything in that house seemed solid, untouchable, as if nothing could shake the stability they had achieved over the years. For Ethan, life with Sophie was a certainty, a fortress built on trust, respect and, above all, the love he once believed to be unshakable. Sophie has always been a woman with a strong, determined, and ambitious personality. At the beginning of their marriage, she was a tireless partner, someone who shared the same ambitions and took as much pride in Ethan's achievements as he did himself. She was by his side in every important decision, in every victory and also in defeats. But as the years passed, something about her began to change. Small details that previously seemed irrelevant began to become visible, like a subtle annoyance that grows until it becomes impossible to ignore. The sparkle in her eyes when she looked at Ethan was no longer the same, conversations that were once long and deep became short and empty, spontaneous laughter gave way to prolonged silences. Ethan noticed these changes, but refused to believe anything could be wrong. The work always demanded a lot from him, and maybe that was all. The routine, the challenges, the responsibilities, everything could have caused this momentary distance. He always believed that their love was strong enough to withstand anything. It was just a phase, he convinced himself. Sophie was his wife, the woman he chose to build a life with, and he had no reason to doubt her. Never had. Until then. The nights began to feel longer for Ethan. Sophie stayed up later, checking her phone more often than usual, quickly turning off the screen whenever he approached. Small delays began to become frequent, empty excuses piled up as if they were normal, and the time they spent together became increasingly scarce. When he tried to bring up a deeper topic, the answer always came in a neutral tone, without enthusiasm, as if she were just there out of obligation. He felt like something was slipping through his fingers, but he didn't know exactly what. The couple's friends began to notice the change. At first, it was just discreet glances during dinners, subtle questions about how things were going. Over time, some even risked commenting on the lack of harmony between them. But Ethan always found an explanation for everything. The exhausting routine, the commitments, the challenges of adult life. Everything made sense in his head. He refused to see any other possibility, any other reason that could be behind the growing distance. Even Sophie, when she noticed that he was beginning to notice her coldness, made a point of compensating. Small gestures of affection appeared again, as if to erase any doubt that might arise in his mind. An unexpected kiss, a compliment that seemed lost in time, a night more intense than usual. And Ethan, as always, believed. He wanted to believe. Sophie's work had also become an important part of the equation. Unlike before, she now seemed more involved than ever, participating in events, meetings and trips that were not part of her routine before. She talked about her work enthusiastically but always avoided the details. When asked about her colleagues, about what the new challenges were like, she responded vaguely, looking away, changing the subject quickly. This bothered Ethan, but he tried not to let it show. He trusted her. Always trusted. Until one night, during dinner with friends, an unpretentious comment made something inside him awaken. One of Sophie's friends matter-of-factly mentioned that she saw her at a restaurant last week, but thought it was strange that she hadn't been greeted. Ethan frowned. That night, Sophie had said that she was in a long and tiring meeting, something that prevented her from returning home at the usual time. But, according to her friend, she seemed well accompanied, laughing, relaxed. Ethan's blood ran cold for a moment, but he soon forced a smile, disguising the discomfort that was growing inside him. He refused to listen to that. People make mistakes, coincidences happen. But something began to boil in his chest. An uncomfortable feeling, a doubt that, for the first time, refused to be ignored. The night ended, and on the way home, Sophie spoke as if nothing had happened. Ethan watched her every movement, every expression, trying to see something that he previously ignored. But she looked the same. Sweet, attentive, safe. If there was something hidden there, she knew exactly how to disguise it. When they got home, Sophie went to the shower and he stayed in the living room, looking at his cell phone on the table. For a moment, his mind considered picking up the device, searching for an answer. But he didn't. He still wanted to believe. He wanted to hold on to the idea that it was all just a figment of his imagination. But doubts had been planted. And when doubt sets in, it grows like a slowly spreading root, until it finally becomes impossible to uproot. Discomfort grew inside Ethan like an expanding shadow, occupying every space. The doubt, which before he tried to push away, now pulsed in his mind without letting up. The previously ignored details began to fit into a logical line that he didn't want to see, but which became increasingly evident. Sophie was different. The touches seemed more distant, the kisses less passionate, the words carried an invisible weight, as if each conversation was an effort. He tried to convince himself that all of this was an exaggeration on his part, that he was creating situations that didn't exist, but reality imposed itself with each new clue, with each new poorly told lie that he pretended to believe. The schedule started to change. Sophie would leave early and return later, always with plausible justifications, but filled with a hesitation that didn't exist before. The cell phone, which used to be left on the table or thrown on the sofa, now never left her side. Notifications were read quickly, messages deleted before any trace remained. When he questioned her about any detail of her routine, he received automatic answers, memorized phrases that seemed rehearsed. It was as if an invisible barrier had been erected between the two, and no matter how much he tried to cross it, Sophie remained firmly on the other side, unreachable. Nights that used to be peaceful were now filled with suffocating silence. Ethan began to observe her more closely, searching in the smallest gestures for any hint of the truth he feared to find. He noticed when she overdressed for mundane events, when her laugh sounded different on the phone, when her mind seemed to be anywhere else but there, next to him. Little by little, his confidence began to erode, corroded by the poison of uncertainty. He felt like he was missing something essential, but he still clung to the hope that it was all just paranoia, a mistake that would be cleared up over time. But time, instead of bringing comforting answers, only deepened the chasm between them. It was one night, one of those nights that seemed to drag by, that something inside Ethan gave way. He was in the office, trying to concentrate on work, when the phone rang. The voice on the other end of the line was someone he knew well, but hadn't expected to hear at that moment. She was a close friend of Sophie, someone who, until then, had always shown loyalty to the couple. But that night, her loyalties changed direction. "I need to tell you something. I tried to ignore it, I tried to pretend I didn't see it, but I can't keep quiet anymore." The words came like a punch, each syllable carrying crushing weight. The friend hesitated for a moment, perhaps considering whether she should continue, but then she blurted out everything at once, as if she needed to get rid of that secret as quickly as possible. "She is now in a restaurant, with someone else." Ethan's heart stopped for a moment. The mouth dried up. The hands gripped the phone tightly. He wanted to ask who it was, he wanted details, he wanted to understand, but at the same time, he was afraid to hear the answer. The friend continued, her voice thick with nervousness. "I saw it with my own eyes. They were together, talking in a way that leaves no doubt." Ethan's blood boiled. The ground seemed to open up beneath his feet. Every shred of uncertainty he tried to ignore now turned into a truth that was impossible to deny. He quickly thanked her and hung up, but remained still for a few seconds, feeling the crushing weight of the revelation. Then something inside him exploded. He got up, grabbed his car keys and left the house without even thinking about what he would do when he got there. He just knew he needed to see it with his own eyes. The ride to the restaurant was a blur. The anger mixed with the pain made every second more unbearable. His mind worked in a whirlwind of thoughts, remembering every moment of the last few months, every sign he ignored, every lie he accepted without question. And now, here he was, just minutes away from finding out where this was going, from having the final confirmation of what until then he had only feared. The restaurant was busy, full of couples and groups who seemed oblivious to what was about to happen. Ethan entered and his gaze swept the room in search of her. His heart was beating so hard that he could barely hear his own thoughts. And then, he saw her. Sophie was sitting at a table in the corner, elegantly dressed, her hair impeccable, an easy smile on her face. But he wasn't the one sitting in front of her. The man accompanying her was someone Ethan had never seen before, but that didn't matter. The look, the touch, the closeness between the two, everything was unmistakable. This was not a simple conversation. It wasn't a casual encounter. It was a betrayal, open before his eyes. His body stiffened. The air seemed to be lacking. Every fiber of his existence screamed for him to go there and demand explanations, to confront Sophie right there, in front of everyone. But for a brief moment, he didn't move. He just stood there, watching the woman he loved, the woman he built a life with, placed in another man's arms as if he had never existed. The stomach turned. The anger pulsed stronger. He felt a bitter taste in his mouth, a mix of indignation and disbelief. And then, he walked to the table, determined to put an end to this once and for all. Sophie looked up and saw him. Her smile died instantly. The lover stopped talking, confused by her expression, and then followed her gaze, finding Ethan standing there, just a few steps away from them. Silence spread across the table, filled with tension, and it was at that moment that Ethan knew that this would be the end of it all. But what he didn't know yet was that the worst was yet to come. The silence around the table was suffocating. Sophie still held the wine glass between her fingers, but her hand was shaking slightly, betraying the panic that was beginning to settle in her chest. The man in front of her, the one she tried so hard to keep hidden, was now looking from one to the other, not really understanding what was happening. But Ethan understood. Ethan saw everything clearly now. He didn't need explanations, half-baked excuses or desperate attempts at manipulation. What stood before him was a complete betrayal, not just a slip, not just a mistake. It was a choice. Something she built, nurtured, kept alive at the cost of his trust. And now, there was no going back. Anger burned in his throat, but when he spoke, his voice was cold, calculated, as if each word had been honed to hit exactly where it was supposed to. "Sophie, I hope it was worth it." Her eyes widened, surprised by his calmness. "Did you expect screams? Did you expect a chaotic scene? Maybe tears?" But Ethan was no longer the man she thought she knew. He had changed the moment he saw her there, in that restaurant, with that man. Sophie opened her mouth, trying to say something, maybe deny it, maybe beg for a modicum of understanding, but Ethan raised his hand, cutting off any attempt before she could form it. "I don't want to hear it. You've already made your choices. Now you're going to listen to mine." The lover looked from one to the other, finally understanding what was happening. He raised his hands uncomfortably, as if he was trying to get away from the scene before something worse happened. But Ethan completely ignored him. He wasn't important. He never was. He was nothing more than a disposable piece in a game that was already lost. The real shock wasn't seeing them together. It was knowing what would come next. Sophie swallowed hard when she saw Ethan slide a folder across the table. It wasn't bulky, but enough to bring crushing weight to the situation. She looked at the object as if it were something alive, something dangerous, a bomb about to explode. With hesitant fingers, he picked up the envelope and began leafing through it. The blood drained from his face instantly. The papers slipped out of his hands and scattered across the table. Her desperate gaze met his, but Ethan just watched her, impassive. "I took your name out of everything," he said, softly, so only she could hear, but with a tone that carried a punch far stronger than any scream could have. "You always trusted that I would take care of you, that I would keep our lives intact, that I would be the one to hold everything together while you played at living a second life behind my back." Sophie opened her mouth to object, but found no words. His entire body was shaking now. "The house isn't yours anymore. The car? Neither. All the accounts you used without bothering to check the statements. They've been cancelled. Every penny you thought you still had. Gone." Desperation began to appear in her expression, a panic that she could no longer hide. "This can't be true," she whispered, her voice breaking, her eyes running over the pages again, trying to find a mistake, something that would show that this was nothing more than a bluff. But there was no mistake. Everything was there, sealed, signed, irrefutable. "You wouldn't do that to me." Ethan let out a dry laugh, without humor, without mercy. "Wouldn't I?" He leaned forward slightly, eyes boring into hers, finally seeing the woman before him as she truly was. "Did you think you could just play with me, lie to me, cheat on me and still keep everything we've built together? Did you think that, in the end, I would just sit there, waiting, while you had fun? Do you think I'm some idiot who would agree to go home and pretend like nothing happened?" Her silence was the only response. And it was at that moment that reality hit hard. The lover, not knowing where to put his face, got up, pulling on his jacket as if trying to escape the scenario collapsing before his eyes. But Sophie didn't even notice. His mind was spinning, calculating, trying to find a way out, but all the doors seemed locked. What was once a choice, now became an irreparable mistake. She never predicted this outcome. She never imagined that the man she silently betrayed would be able to turn the tables like this. "Ethan, please." The plea came with a shred of voice, his eyes were teary, but there was no real regret there. Just despair. A suffocating fear of what would come next. Ethan stood. His work there was done. He watched her for a moment, recording that expression in his mind. Betrayal hurt, yes. But the certainty that she was paying the price for her choices made everything more bearable. "I hope it was worth it," he repeated, before turning around and leaving the restaurant, feeling, for the first time in a long time, that he no longer had a weight on his shoulders. But Sophie was left behind, with the wreckage of her life spread out before her. And deep down, a truth began to emerge in his mind: Ethan wouldn't look back. No more. The cold night wind cut into Ethan's face as he walked away from the restaurant, but he barely felt it. His body was there, but his mind still echoed with the words he spoke, with Sophie's expression as she read the documents, with the absolute emptiness that settled between them. I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel satisfaction. Just the certainty that there was nothing more to be said. Everything that needed to be done had already been done. However, something inside him would not calm down. He should feel free, relieved, but the weight of that betrayal still throbbed inside his head, like an open wound that hadn't stopped bleeding yet. He tried to push the thoughts away, go home and leave everything behind, but he knew it wouldn't be that simple. Some pain doesn't go away just because we decide to move on. Some wounds remain, marked forever. Sophie continued to sit in the restaurant, motionless, with her eyes still fixed on the papers on the table. The lover was already gone, disappeared like a ghost that should never have been there. But she didn't move. The shock was paralyzing. Ethan's every word echoed in his head like a final verdict. He had truly left her with nothing. All the certainties she had, all the plans she never verbalized, everything had collapsed before her eyes without her having time to react. She tried to swallow hard, tried to gather any fragment of coherent thought, but all she could feel was panic. How had this happened? How had Ethan, the predictable, always stable and reliable man, managed to do something so devastating? He always protected her, he was always there for her. She never imagined he could react like this. But now he was pulling away, and for the first time, she realized that she might never get him back. She hurriedly stood up, her legs wobbling under the weight of the reality that now crushed her. I couldn't let him go like that. Not without trying, not without at least fighting. She ran outside, her eyes scanning the street until she found his silhouette, moving away. The heart raced. Ethan. His voice broke in the cold air, but he didn't stop. She quickened her steps, heels clicking against the sidewalk. Ethan, please listen to me. He stopped, but didn't turn around right away. He took a deep breath, trying to control the turmoil inside him before facing her again. Then, finally, he turned around. The look he gave her was unlike any he had ever given her before. There was no more love there, not even hate. Just a deep tiredness, a cutting disinterest. There's nothing more to say, Sophie. She swallowed, her hands shaking. Please. I know I was wrong, I know, you know. He laughed humorlessly, a bitter sound that made your chest hurt. Do you know you made a mistake? Now do you know? After you lost everything? Or would you have continued, Sophie? If I hadn't found out, if I had never shown up at that restaurant, how much longer would you have continued? She blinked, feeling the impact of those words like a blow. He tried to answer, but he couldn't lie, not anymore. He knew the truth. She knew the truth. And now, all that was left between them were ruins. I never wanted to hurt you, she said, her voice breaking, desperate to find a shred of empathy in him. Ethan, I loved you. I still love you. His eyes narrowed. You loved it? So tell me, Sophie, at what point in your love did you decide it was okay to deceive me? At what point did I become insufficient for you? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't about that. I felt lost, I felt trapped. I needed something more, something different. He crossed his arms, watching her as if he were trying to understand the woman before him for the first time. Something else. Something different. He repeated the words slowly, feeling the bitter taste they left in his mouth. And now? Now that you have different, what do you feel, Sophie? Now that you have nothing left of what we had, now that you destroyed all of that for a moment of excitement, for a cheap illusion, was it still worth it? She closed her eyes, the sobs coming out of control. I didn't know what to answer. Because the truth was cruel. Nothing was worth it. She had bet everything and lost. She lost the trust of the only man who really cared about her, she lost her stability, her security, the life she led without worries. And all why? For a passion that never had real meaning. Ethan, please, don't leave me like this. Give me a chance to fix this. He laughed again, a cold, distant sound. Fix this? He took a step forward, leaning slightly towards her. You can't fix something you broke on purpose, Sophie. This. He gestured between the two, pointing to the empty space that separated them. That doesn't exist anymore. You made your choice. I made mine. She sobbed, gripping his shirt tightly. Tell me what I can do. Anything. I'll do anything. He stared at her for long seconds, analyzing every feature of her face, every tear, every sign of despair. And then, finally, he blurted out the only answer he could give. Nothing. Sophie felt her legs give out, her chest tighten, her world crumble for the last time. Ethan removed his hands gently, without haste, without violence, but with a firmness that made it clear that this was the end. No more words, no more goodbyes, no more second chances. He turned his back and walked on, leaving Sophie behind, trapped in the consequences of her own actions. She stood there, still, watching him disappear into the distance. And for the first time, he felt the true weight of what he had done. The void he left could not be filled. She hadn't just lost the man with whom she shared years of her life. He had lost everything. She had lost the only person who truly loved her. And now, there was nothing he could do to change that. The sound of Ethan's footsteps diminished as he walked away, but Sophie still felt the impact of those last words resonating within her like an inescapable echo. Nothing. That was the only answer he gave him, and perhaps the worst one he could receive. It wasn't anger, it wasn't a promise of revenge, it wasn't even a last insult. It was just a raw, definitive truth. Nothing more could be done. She wanted to run after him again, wanted to hold his hand, ask him to look her in the eyes and see who she really was, not the woman who made a mistake, but the woman who, somehow, could still be saved from that mistake. But his feet were glued to the ground, his body held back by the weight of the consequences that, until then, he never imagined he would actually face. The lights of the restaurant reflected on the wet streets, and for a moment Sophie felt as if everything around her was distant, as if the world continued to spin, indifferent to the chaos that was taking place inside her. The cold of the night ripped at his skin, but nothing felt as cold as the emptiness Ethan had left behind when he left. The idea of losing everything seemed abstract until that moment. During all the time she spent venturing into betrayal, there was always a part of her that believed that, in the end, she could return, that, somehow, everything could be forgotten, forgiven, rebuilt. But now there were no illusions left. She wouldn't come home. He would not return to his safe and comfortable life. She would not return to the arms of a man who, for years, had been there for her, and who had now disappeared, not just physically, but from her life completely. She began to walk aimlessly, her hands shaking without realizing it, her mind shuffled between memories and an avalanche of thoughts that refused to organize themselves. Every image was a blow, Ethan laughing beside her, the quiet Sunday mornings, the moments when he looked at her like she was the only person in the world who mattered. All of this was now an unreachable past, a time she threw away without thinking about the real consequences. Her chest felt tight, and she wondered if she would ever be able to escape that suffocating feeling, that weight that seemed to crush her more with every second. She walked for a few blocks before realizing she had nowhere to go. Your house was no longer yours, nor was your car. He picked up his cell phone, but there was no one to call. None of the people she had spent the last few months with could help her. The man she was with at the restaurant had already left, without even worrying about what would happen to her. He never cared, and now Sophie realizes it was all a fragile illusion, a lie she herself chose to believe. When she finally found the strength to move consciously, she decided to take a taxi and go to a friend's house, one of the few who could still listen to her without immediately judging her. The journey was silent, the driver didn't even ask if she was okay, perhaps used to customers who seemed full of stories that couldn't be told. When he reached his destination, he hesitated for a moment before ringing the doorbell. The door opened and her friend's expression instantly changed. It was obvious that Sophie was destroyed, but nothing needed to be said. "Come in," was the only thing she heard before she was pulled inside. Sophie collapsed onto the couch, covering her face with her hands, trying to maintain her composure but failing miserably. The weight of the tears she'd been holding back all night finally came to the surface, and silent sobs began to escape. Her friend sat next to her, watching, waiting, knowing that any words spoken ahead of time would be useless. "He left me with nothing," Sophie finally whispered, her voice weak, as if she still couldn't believe those words were coming out of her own mouth. I thought I could fix things, but he didn't give me a chance. He doesn't want me anymore, he doesn't love me anymore." Her friend sighed, crossing her arms, and then said what Sophie feared to hear. "And what did you expect?" Sophie looked up, surprised by the harshness of the answer. "Did you really think you could do that and get away with it? That Ethan would just sit there, waiting for you to finish your fun phase and come back to him as if nothing had happened?" Those words hurt more than anything Ethan said. Because they were true. Because they were obvious. Because they were everything she refused to admit to herself until now. "I know I made a mistake," Sophie murmured, her voice breaking. "But I still love him." The friend laughed, but without humor. "Loving someone means nothing when your actions prove otherwise. Did you love him while you went off to find another man? While you lied to him? While you pretended you were still the same devoted wife? You made your choices, Sophie, and now you're reaping what you sowed." Sophie felt a wave of anger rise, mixed with frustration and despair. "Do you think I wanted it to end like this? You think I wouldn't do anything to take it back? I lost everything." "Yes," the friend agreed, without softening the blow. "And you need to accept that." Acceptance was cruel. It was cold. And it was the only thing left. Sophie wanted to scream, wanted to justify, wanted to blame something else, anyone else. But deep down, she knew her friend was right. All she had now was the weight of wrong choices, lies, betrayals. And Ethan. Ethan would never come back. The hours passed, and Sophie remained there, motionless, staring into space, trying to understand what would come next. How do you move on when everything you knew no longer existed? How to start over without knowing where to go? Ethan, on the other hand, drove without a clear destination. Her face was still etched in his mind, but he refused to let any trace of regret take hold. He did what needed to be done. He left her behind, just like she left him when she chose another man. But the anger and hurt were still there, simmering, reminding him that even though he was the victor of that war, he had still been hurt in the process. Time wouldn't erase that any time soon. But one thing was certain, Sophie had closed a chapter. And Ethan knew that no matter how much it hurt, he would move on. And maybe, just maybe, destiny had something better in store for him. Something true. Something that wouldn't end in betrayal and destruction. Sophie spent the night awake, sitting on the sofa at her friend's house, staring at a fixed point on the wall, while her mind sank into an ocean of regret and despair. Ethan's words still echoed in her head, replaying like a cruel reminder of what she had lost. Every minute that passed made reality more unbearable. There was nowhere to run, there were no excuses that could erase what he had done. For years, she convinced herself that she would always have control over the consequences of her choices, that she could always reverse any damage she caused. But now, faced with silence and the overwhelming feeling of emptiness, he realized that he had crossed a line of no return. When the sun began to rise over the horizon, the friend entered the room and found it in the same way she had left it. His gaze was distant, his dark circles were deep and his skin was pale. The tension in the atmosphere was palpable, but the friend knew that any words said at that moment would not change anything. Sophie already knew the truth. He had already faced the consequences. Now all that was left was to learn to live with them. You need to make a decision, the friend finally said, crossing her arms. Sitting there and complaining isn't going to change anything. Sophie blinked slowly, as if coming out of a trance, and then, for the first time since the night before, she let out a deep sigh. I know, but what do I do now? His voice was weak, filled with uncertainty. The friend shrugged. Only you can decide that. But staying here, stuck in the past, is definitely not an option. Sophie knew she was right. But where to go? How to start over with nothing? Her world had collapsed in just a few hours, and now, she found herself without ground, without direction, without any hope of regaining what she once had. But one thing was certain, she needed to find a way to move on. Even if it meant facing a completely unknown future. Meanwhile, Ethan drove aimlessly, leaving the city behind, feeling the need to breathe a different air, away from any memory of Sophie. He didn't know where he was going, he just knew he needed to get away. The adrenaline from the night before was still coursing through his veins, but now, it was mixed with an exhaustion that seemed to consume every part of his body. He stopped the car at a gas station on the side of the road, got out and rested his hands on the hood, closing his eyes for a moment. For the first time, he felt the full weight of what had happened. He had ended everything. And even though I knew there was no other alternative, I couldn't deny that it still hurt. His cell phone vibrated in his pocket, and he picked it up, expecting to see Sophie's name on the screen, but it wasn't her. He was a close friend, someone who knew his story with Sophie from the beginning. Ethan hesitated before answering, but in the end, he slid his finger across the screen and lifted the device to his ear. How are you? The voice on the other end was cautious, careful, as if it already knew the answer wouldn't be good. Ethan let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. I'm breathing. The friend sighed. I heard what happened. I don't know if you want to talk about it right now, but if you need to, I'm here. He was silent for a few moments, trying to process what he really felt. Everything was still very confusing, everything was very recent. But then, without realizing it, he started talking. He told her about the betrayal, about how he found out, about how he dismantled Sophie's life, about her expression when she realized she had nothing left. The friend listened carefully, without interrupting, and when Ethan finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line before the answer came. You did what needed to be done, Ethan. But now it's up to you. What next? That was the question he had been trying to avoid. What would happen now? What would he do with the life he had left, without Sophie, without the stability he knew? He had to start over, but how? He hung up the call without getting a response. He climbed back into the car and continued driving, not knowing where but feeling that somehow he was heading in the right direction. Sophie, on the other hand, decided she needed to see Ethan. She knew it was a risk, she knew that maybe he would kick her out of his life permanently, but she couldn't just accept the end without at least trying. He needed to say something, anything, he needed to find a way to say goodbye or perhaps to beg for a scrap of consideration. She took a taxi and went to the apartment of a mutual acquaintance, someone she knew could help her find out where Ethan was. When he arrived, he knocked on the door hesitantly, feeling his heart beat faster. Ethan's friend opened it and looked at her with a frown, clearly knowing what had happened. Sophie. I need to talk to him, she said quickly, bluntly. Please. I only need 5 minutes. The friend crossed his arms, sighing. I think you already said everything you needed to when you decided to betray him. She closed her eyes, feeling the impact of those words. I know. I know I don't deserve it, but I just need to see him one last time. He hesitated, studying her for a moment, before finally shaking his head. He's not here. He left the city. I don't know where he went, I just know he wanted away from it all. The answer hit Sophie like a blow. Ethan was really gone. He wasn't expecting her to come back. There was no chance of a dramatic reunion, of a well-crafted apology that could change anything. He was simply gone. The friend noticed his reaction and, despite the harshness of his words, softened his tone. If you want advice, Sophie, go ahead. Don't try to find it. Don't try to reverse what's already been done. Some things can't be fixed. Sophie nodded slowly, saying nothing. He turned and left, not knowing where to go, just feeling that now there was nothing he could do. Ethan drove for hours until he stopped in a small town he had never visited before. He found a simple hotel, checked in and threw himself on the bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, he allowed himself to breathe without thinking about Sophie, without thinking about betrayal, without thinking about revenge. He was alone, and that should have been scary, but in a way, it was also freeing. The pain was still there, but he knew that over time it would become weaker. The future was still a mystery, but he had something Sophie no longer had, control over her own life. And maybe that would be enough to start over. Time passed, but the scars of betrayal still marked Ethan and Sophie's days in completely different ways. He moved on, rebuilding himself away from everything that reminded him of her, while she sank deeper and deeper into the consequences of her choices. What once seemed like a dangerous game now turned into an unbearable reality, where each day was a reminder of what had been lost. Ethan found refuge in change. After leaving everything behind, he settled in a new place, far from known eyes, where no one knew his history, where he could simply exist without the weight of the past suffocating him at every corner. In the first few months, loneliness felt like a punishment, as if he were condemned to reliving every moment of the betrayal in his mind, remembering every detail, every word spoken, every look he should never have seen. But, little by little, he realized that he wasn't just running away from Sophie. He was running away from himself, from the man he had been, from the one who blindly trusted and believed in empty promises. When he finally understood this, something inside him began to change. He stopped looking back and started building something new, something that wasn't defined by what happened. His work remained solid, and with the money he had protected in the divorce, he had the freedom to choose his next steps without rushing. He started investing in projects he always wanted, but never had time for. He met new people, learned to appreciate small moments without the constant shadow of distrust. He was never the same again, and maybe that was a good thing. The naivety was gone, but in its place came a strength he never knew he possessed. And then one day, he met someone. It wasn't an overwhelming passion, nor love at first sight, but it was different. She was light, without the ghosts of the past, without the lies, without the games that had defined her previous relationship. At first, Ethan hesitated, afraid to allow himself to feel anything again, afraid of being deceived once again. But over time, he realized that he didn't need to dwell on what happened. Sophie was just a distant memory, a story that was in the past. And now, the gift was his to rewrite however he wanted. Meanwhile, Sophie was sinking into a void she didn't know how to fill. In the first few months after the divorce, he tried to rebuild his life as if nothing had happened, trying to convince himself that he still had control. But she soon realized that her stability had never been hers, but rather a reflection of what Ethan had provided. Without him, her life was a house of cards crumbling with every wind that blew. The lover who once seemed so interesting disappeared quickly, making it clear that he never intended to stay. The friendships she had cultivated over the years also began to disappear, one by one, leaving her alone with the echo of her own mistakes. She tried to seek comfort in what once distracted her, but nothing seemed enough. The life he so longed for, the freedom he thought he needed, was now nothing more than a shattered illusion. Sophie reached out to Ethan a few times, but he never answered. Never responded. Never looked back. It was then that she realized that he had truly moved on, while she was left behind, trapped in a maze of regrets. Over time, his situation worsened. Without the financial stability she had with Ethan, she was forced to seek new paths, to face a world that once seemed so simple, but was now ruthless. The job she had was not enough to keep her at the same standard of living. She had to move to a smaller place, she had to abandon the luxuries that previously seemed banal, she had to face the harsh reality that, alone, she was nothing like she thought she was. She has become a shadow of her former self. He walked the streets without direction, observed happy couples and wondered how everything had gone so wrong. Deep down, I knew the answer. She knew there was no one to blame but herself. But this truth was an unbearable weight. And then, one cold and lonely night, sitting in a cheap cafe, she saw a couple walking in, smiling at each other, exchanging looks that carried something she hadn't seen in a long time: trust. In the next instant, his heart stopped. It was Ethan. And next to him, a woman who clearly occupied the space that was once his. Shock ran through his body like lightning. He looked different. Lighter, calmer, happier. Without her. For a moment, their eyes met. And then, something unexpected happened. Ethan simply looked away and continued walking, as if she were just another stranger in the crowd. And in that moment, Sophie understood. She had ceased to exist for him. The weight of that truth crushed her in a way no blow before had been able to. It wasn't just seeing him with someone else. It wasn't just the pain of knowing he had moved on. It was realizing that, for him, she no longer mattered. And perhaps that would be the worst punishment of all. Now that the story has come to an end, I want to know what you thought. Comment your opinion, share your thoughts about the characters' choices and what you would do in their place. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this. Here, we do not support treason. We show its consequences.